Welcome back to Uncomfortable Truths We Avoid. This is episode 8, What the Kids Carry. First, I want to thank you for joining me, for supporting me, for watching my podcast. This podcast is really an outlet for me to maybe help people in my own way. It's therapeutic for me, just discussing maybe some things I went through in the past. And I just really appreciate your support. Now, in an effort to be 100% real with you, today you're catching me en natural. So it's a Saturday. This is when I do my podcast, okay? And I have my heated blanket going, I'm just kind of relaxing. And when I get the feelings that hit for the podcast episode, I'm just going to let it flow, okay? So you get me 100% real today. You get my frizzy situation that's happening up here. You get not a stitch of makeup on my face, me, and that's okay, because I guess another little thing before we go into the podcast episode is I am at a stage in my life where I'm just really unapologetically me, and that's okay. You're going to get different versions of me. So I don't want you to anticipate that I don't ever look perfect, ever. I never do. I'm not the type of person who's always going to be 100% polished. That's just not me. So you're going to get however I'm feeling that day. That's what you're going to get. Today I'm feeling relaxed and ready. So I'm just going to be me. Now, I will premise this by telling you, if you see me turn really red or I'm really red in the face, I do have rosacea. So I'm not in distress. Not at all. It's just my rosacea acting up again. But this today it's not too bad. So I don't use a lot of harsh products anymore, so I'm okay. But we'll get started. So I want to welcome you back to Uncomfortable Truths We Avoid. And today, the uncomfortable truth we avoid is that when families experience turmoil or go through the family breaking, children absorb a lot of what's going on too. And we don't always address it right away, but it always comes out as years start passing by. And we do have to address it. I usually relate the stories to what happened in my own life. This also sort of relates to family dynamics, not just in a relationship, but also with families, like when you have families that don't get along, things like that. This also relates. So we're going to talk about kids, how they just silently watch. And many times when we are in the thick of it, when we are dealing with a relationship that's unhealthy, or we're dealing with an unhealthy family dynamic, our kids are often in the background watching, and we don't always acknowledge that they're picking up on every little thing, but they are. So kids watch silently, and they put that in the back of their mind and they think about it. And, it's something we do have to talk about. So a lot of the time when we're going through these big family changes, everyone's focused on what happened, who stayed, who went, what went wrong in the situation, who was hurt. And all of that focus is mainly what's in the forefront. But we have to remember that children are also a part of the story. And that's what this episode is mainly about. For me, I have two sons who are adults now. I have a 25-year-old and I have a 19-year-old. They are adults now. But during the time that I went through my divorce, my youngest was 9 and my oldest was, I believe, 14 years old. So these are very impressionable ages and very emotional ages. So I want to touch on that a little bit and some of the things that they did tell me as years passed, and some of the things they revealed to me about their feelings at the moments that I guess mattered the most, that we really didn't address at the time because there was so much going on. We're so busy being wrapped up in our own turmoil, arguing with our significant other or family members or what have you, that we're not really thinking about, what the kids are going through in that moment. And they usually don't know every detail. Kids will not know every detail. They'll never reveal to you what they're truly feeling, but they can feel the silence. They can feel the tension. They feel the fear. If you have fear, they feel it. It's just a feeling, if you're someone who has a lot of feelings, you understand what I'm saying. If you're an empath and you absorb a lot of things, you know what I'm talking about. But kids do feel confusion, and they notice changes in stability, routine, and especially things like tone. So they always will notice things like that. So children may not understand every single detail, but they definitely they understand when something feels broken. So it's important that you remember that. For those of you who may be going through something, children are very intuitive. They understand exactly what feelings are all about. But they won't always discuss it with you. So that's something to kind of keep in back of your mind. Children often carry confusion, which is divided by loyalty. So when it comes to a dynamic where there's a divorce and there's two parents that are no longer going to be together, the children are faced with a big decision. What do we do now? We have two people we love that are no longer going to be in the same household. But where does my loyalty lie? It's a decision that children shouldn't have to make. But unfortunately, this is what unfolds. Kids often love both parents. They feel stuck in the middle. They feel pressure, but they don't say it directly to you, even though they are feeling the pressure of everything. They really don't know how to feel about everything. I know in my situation, we had a wonderful home. I had helped buy that home, and I had made the decision that I couldn't manage a large household with all the maintenance that would be required, and all of the issues that were probably going to come up on my own, because I knew that I was going to be rebuilding my life. I had goals. I was going to go back to school, and I knew that doing that, I wasn't going to have the time to maintain a household on my own. And it hurt because I had invested so much money and time in that, in that home. So it was rough having to let it go. And it was even more rough for the kids because that was where they felt they were going to stay forever. And it wasn't going to be there forever anymore. So that was upsetting to them and unsettling to them, because this is something that rocked their entire world. Kids want peace too, but they don't always know how to create it. And usually kids are feeling guilty about loving one parent when they're upset with the other parent. So I don't know what dynamics, you're going through or what you've been through, but that's going to be the dynamic for you as well. It could be that one parent did something, to betray the marriage, but it also betrays the kids. In my case, that was what my sons felt. They felt it was a disloyalty. It was extremely disrespectful, but it was not only to me but to our whole family. It was disrespectful to our sons. It was disrespectful to me. It was awful, and they felt disrespected as well. I know at the time though, they're young. They didn't know how to separate things. But one of the hardest things children carry is feeling like they're standing in the middle of pain, and they didn't create it, but they also can't fix it. So they're just sort of helpless in the middle of everything. Kids often get trapped in the emotional crossfire, even though you think that you're keeping them out of everything. They're always stuck. I think a lot of the time when parents go through separations or there's divorces or things unfold in the family dynamic, we like to think as parents that we're keeping the kids out of it and they're not having to listen to any of it, but they really are much sharper than we sometimes give them credit for. Um, they do carry anger and sadness and resentment, and they withdraw sometimes. And this is something that they're going to experience that we as parents have to address. Kids will not always express pain in neat, polite ways. I know that my 14-year-old, he was so angry at the time. There was an incident at school. He was in high school at the time where he got into a fight with someone, and it was just awful. It was really bad, but it was at the peak of we were about to leave our home and start over, and he was starting his high school life, and he felt like everything was being taken away from him. The room he always wanted. He had his own bedroom and his own master bathroom, and it was what he wanted, right? But all of it was going away because of what unfolded. And that was harsh. That was a harsh reality, right? But it does come out as anger. So if you see that your kids are experiencing angry fits, it's related. It could be angry fits. My other son, my younger son, he was more emotional. So it would be just, maybe crying out of the blue, just, and I didn't know how to manage any of this. I was just barely able to manage myself. We talked about the last episode when I was barely able to manage myself. And now I'm having to manage the emotions of my two sons, one who's a teenager, one who's about to turn 10, very impressionable ages. So there's resistance, there's mood changes, there's I don't want to visit him. I don't want to go see him. I don't want to visit the other parent because I'm angry. They may not want to talk sometimes. Throughout the entire time that I was going through my my divorce, I was very much an advocate for forgiving and for letting go of, what unfolded. And I very much wanted my sons to have a relationship with their father. I'm not the person, I'm not that ex who will use my kids as leverage or anything like that. I always spoke well about my ex-husband. I never spoke negatively about him. And you can ask my sons today, and they will tell you I never said anything negative about him. I always planted good seeds, right? But the problem was that it's not the fact that I could plant as many good seeds as I want, but my sons drew their own conclusions based on what they saw, based on the disrespect that they witnessed. I didn't plant those seeds. I couldn't take back those seeds that were already planted, so there was only so much that I could do. Once they had already, that had already started, I could, the seeds that I planted about, just forgive and love and all of that, those didn't mean much. So kids draw their own conclusions, and that's still the truth, 100%. To this day, those are the facts. That's the way it was in my dynamic. I planted good seeds, but all the weeds that were already growing, I couldn't cancel that out. So what can I say? I mean, it's a hard truth. Kids often feel emotionally exhausted as well. And, I had two sons that were completely different. One that expressed his pain in anger, which was my oldest son, one that was emotional when he expressed his pain. So pain in children doesn't always look like tears, but sometimes it looks like distance, like they don't want to talk at all, or they're frustrated, or they're defiant, or they're silent. So having to deal with that and not fully understand everything as a teenager or a young person is hard. You're barely getting to know yourself, and you're having to manage all of these feelings. I really don't want to get emotional during these podcasts, but I'll tell you number one, but this is about me being real. And watching my children carry the pain that they had to carry was one of the hardest parts. It was hard because I didn't come first and I didn't want to come first, but my children being okay was number one for me. And they were not okay. And to this day, they still aren't 100% okay. And I hate that for them because I'm honestly, I always say I'm living my best life, and I am, because I'm so happy at this point in my life. And there's so many wonderful things I've experienced since I left that bad place and I've come to my happy place. But but I chose to let go of all of it, and I've chosen, most recently to start healing in my journey, right? And that's why I'm doing this podcast. But my sons still carry little things here and there that pop up. And I always tell them, you need to let it go. The past is the past. It was so long ago, but it still just sits there, in the back of their mind. And I don't know if it was because they were younger when it happened or more impressionable. But it still, it sits there and it nags at them. And I can't change the way they feel. Their dad can apologize to them till he's blue in the face, and it's still there. I mean, and we can't fix it. We can't fix that. It was one of the hardest parts, watching the pain, It's one thing to hurt for yourself, because I did feel, sad that my family crumbled, but it's a whole other dynamic to watch your child hurt and not know how to fix it, Um, I felt like I couldn't protect them. I'd gotten out of this bad situation, which I should have gotten out a long time before that, but I didn't. I mean, I wanted to fix it right away, but this is something that couldn't instantly be fixed, and I'm a fixer. So if you know me, you know that I like to fix things and they need to be fixed right away. I want to address it and get it over with. I couldn't do that with this, and I didn't know how to fix it. I'm grieving for my children what they lost too. They lost their home. They lost their family dynamic. They lost all the things that they'd hoped for because of bad decisions that were made. And, what can I say? I can't change those things, but it's a deep grief, grieving for your children. One of the hardest parts of rebuilding is realizing that your children are rebuilding too. It's not just you. They're having to rebuild. And it's in a different way, but they are still doing it. And as a parent, sometimes the most painful part is not your own heartbreak, but watching your child carry pieces of it. So one thing that really is a big part of this, what the kids carry, is the dynamics between the adults. Okay, kids should not have to carry adult choices, period. Okay. I told you about how it's true. My dynamic in my relationship was terrible at that point in time. I was, what I thought was a good, faithful partner, and I tried my best to pick up the pieces every time they broke apart. But my significant other, disrespected our marriage, disrespected me. It was not repairable at that point. And our children had witnessed this, which was even worse. But I did mention to you that I was always, I forgave everything that happened. I took the high road. I never spoke badly about my ex. And I never asked my children to play roles that they shouldn't play. There were never I never said, you need to go tell your dad this, or you need to tell him that, or you know what, tell your dad this. I never did any of that, because kids should not be messengers. They're not your parrots. Okay. They're not therapists. They're not parrots. They are not emotional support for adult mistakes. You can't turn to your kids for that. They're children. They can barely manage their own pain, much less manage adult pain. They can't. They can't manage adult pain too, on top of their own. And we can't expect our children to pretend everything's fine. Don't expect that from them. You know, they're barely navigating the turmoil that was caused by their parents, or, you know, the turmoil that's caused by the family, and they're just sifting through it. So you can't expect perfection from them. You know, they're just kids trying to get through it. Children should never be asked to carry the emotional weight of the decisions that they didn't make, you know, and that's a fact. You know, they're just sitting in the back watching all of this unfold, but you should never expect the children to carry any of that. So, one of the things that I felt was very important when I left my marriage was stability and focusing on my children. That's number one. Okay. My significant other was already in another relationship almost a couple weeks right after, like, boom, in it, which is shame on you. But anyway, that's besides the point. What I'm trying to say is, I did not bring anyone else into my life because I needed to focus on my children. I needed to focus on me. I needed to heal with nobody else. No other man in my life, nothing like that. I needed to focus on how are my children feeling, how am I feeling. That's the healthy way to go about this, okay? That doesn't happen in most relationships. Everybody's so busy of trying to one up each other and let me try to get another person in my life. Like, really, that's not the way to go. Because healing has to include your children too. Okay. And it's one of the reasons why I didn't bring anyone else into our lives. You know, I didn't actually get into another relationship until 2017. And I was divorced in 2015. So it took me a couple of years just to feel settled. And I still wasn't even completely healed, but I needed my sons to see that their mother was focusing on them, focusing on myself, and focusing on building a stable life for us. I needed them to know that they were my priority at that time. No one else, especially not myself. So, healing is not just about a parent who's moving on. Kids need reassurance. They need to know that you're going to help them get out of the darkness too. You know, they need consistency. They need safety. They need to know what's happening. They need routine. You know, they can't just be like bouncing around like tennis balls, and that's going to make things worse. Remember, they're going from this place where they had everything all figured out and everything was hunky dory. I know I always use that word, to suddenly having their world crumble. And now you're asking them to, I mean, be even more unsafe. I mean, they're not going to know what's going to happen, but they need patience. They need truth at their level, you know, and they need room to feel what they're feeling too, because they're feeling a lot of things that are negative, you know, and they need to be able to feel those things. But they also need permission to not be okay immediately, because we want oftentimes things instantly. We live in an instant world where we want everything to be okay right away. And that's just not going to happen. Not in this situation. If children carry pieces of pain, then healing needs to make room for them too. So It's important for us to remember that when we are going through really big crisis in our life. And when, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or separation, it's important to convey this to them. It is important that you focus on your children. To hell with other relationships. Those aren't important. I'm just being real. I just don't feel like it's important to be hooking up with someone else when life is falling apart. So for those of you who may be going through this, your priority is your children. You need to focus on your dynamic. Okay. If you're a parent listening to this, I want you to remember that children do not need perfect parents. They need honest, safe, steady parents. Okay, that's what they need. They need to know they're loved. They need to know what happened has nothing to do with them. It is not their fault. And they need to know that they're allowed to feel however it is that they feel without being rushed, because it isn't going to happen instantly. They're not going to feel better right out the gate. And if you are someone who grew up carrying these things you were never supposed to carry, if you're listening to this and you're one of the kids, maybe you were on the other side of the coin, I hope you give yourself some compassion too. Because some of the weight that you still feel may not have started with you at all. Some children grow up carrying pain that was never theirs to hold in the first place. Children really, they don't just survive what happened in the family, but they absorb it, they respond to it, they carry pieces of it in their own quiet ways. And maybe one of the most uncomfortable truths that we avoid is that what adults call moving on, it can take much longer in the heart of a child. Part of healing is remembering that our children are rebuilding too. So this was an emotional episode. And this was kind of the closing of this chapter of my life completely, right? I just wanted to explain sort of my origin story and how all of this came to be, right? But episode 9 is going to be rebuilding from scratch, because that's what I had to do when I started over again. And my life was going to be everything I wanted it to be. No matter what unfolded, I was going to make it exactly the way I wanted it to be. And that's what I've done. After all of the survival, the coping, all the weight that my children carried, all of the stuff that was unfolding, you ask, what do we do now, right? How do you rebuild a life from the ground up? It's rough. It's not easy. And I always mention this in some of my episodes. I always tell my students, if it was easy, everybody would do it. Everybody would be doing it. So it's not easy. So a lot of people avoid it. But you have to really ask yourself, where do I want to go next? What do I want out of my life? And really, we're in charge of our lives. We can do whatever we want with them. We can make anything happen as long as we want it badly enough. And so that's what this is about. Our next episode is going to focus on the rebuild, the full rebuild. As always, I want to thank you for supporting me. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on Facebook. If any of these episodes resonate with you, or you feel like they've, I guess you relate to them in some way, I would appreciate your support. Until next time, this is Uncomfortable Truths We Avoid.